Pay attention to what we just read in Romans chapter 1, because the subject is faith and obedience. And what's interesting is that most often we talk about this subject in the context of our denominational friends who say, well, we're saved by faith only. And we say, no, it takes faith and works or faith and obedience. And we get into the debate about that. And of course, that's true. The Bible teaches faith plus obedience. But what we sometimes fail to do is to make a personal application. So what I want all of us to do, including me and you, is to say, now, how is my faith obeying God? Because that's really what we're saying, and then we sometimes don't make a personal application in our own lives, and if we don't do that, we've kind of failed the purpose of the sermon, haven't we? So starting off, we understand that salvation is by faith. The Bible teaches that repeatedly. Hebrews 11:6, without faith it's impossible to please God. Romans chapter 5 and verse 1, therefore being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Or 1 John chapter 5 and verse 4, whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that overcomes the world, our faith. And all of those are true. But keep in mind that our Calvinistic friends, who are the ones who teach the idea of salvation by faith only, for reasons we won't get into this morning, think the book of Romans is their text to prove it. And they often quote Romans to try to prove that Calvinism is true. But it's interesting to me, and I want you to pay attention again to what we read in Romans 1 and verse 5. At the very beginning of the book of Romans, Paul says, God called me to be an apostle. And he says, for obedience to the faith among all nations in his name. So if he says, I've been called to be an apostle for obedience to the faith, how does somebody come up with the idea that we don't have to obey in order to be saved? And if that weren't enough, Paul ends the book the same way in Romans chapter 16, when he says in verse 25, to him who's able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began, but now is made manifest and by the prophetic scriptures made known to all nations. Why? For obedience to the faith. So if you take a passage in Romans out of context and try to prove that we're saved by faith only, you're doing a great disservice to the Bible, to yourself, and to the book of Romans especially. And so we often respond by saying, well, we must have a faith that works. And salvation is by a working faith. And that's true. Galatians 5 and verse 6, from Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. And it's not just enough to say that's what the Bible teaches, that's what we should practice. And we know that Hebrews 5, 8, and 9 says that God, Jesus Christ, is the author of eternal salvation to all those who do what? Obey Him. So the application for you and me is, am I obeying God? Am I following His instructions? Am I living an obedient faith, or if I have a faith that says and does not do? Well, with that thought in mind, we want to go to some ingredients of true faith. And we can see how different it is from the way the world sometimes thinks and acts. And so keep that in mind as we go along. First of all, a true obedient faith goes beyond human reasoning. Keep that in mind, because your faith is going to be required to go beyond human reasoning. Sometimes God will ask you to do something you don't understand why. And our proof text is Hebrews 11 and verse 7, where God says, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things what? Not yet seen. Now, Noah had to do something he'd never done before, and that is build a tremendous ark to save his family and the animals that God commanded, but he'd never seen a flood like that before. In fact, a worldwide flood is so unbelievable that even our scientists today deny that it ever happened. But imagine being Noah and God telling Noah, there's going to be a flood that's going to destroy the whole world, and the only way you can save yourself and your family is by building this ark. What would you do? Well, I don't know how to build an ark. Well, I'll give you the instructions. Well, I'm not a carpenter. You better get to be one soon. What do you think I am, a zookeeper? For a while, yes. You ever stop and think about all the things that required Noah to do that maybe were outside his comfort zone? And so the application comes back to us. Do we do what God tells us when it's uncomfortable? When it requires us to learn something new? When it tells us to do something that asks us to go beyond what we are comfortable doing, and mostly doing something you've never seen before? You believe the world is coming to an end by a conflagration of fire when Jesus Christ returns? Well, you've never seen that. Well, neither had Noah. But he believed it because he knew God's word was true, and therefore build the ark and save the family. And that's what he did. Prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world. Do you think every time he nailed another plank on that ark, he was saying, you folks are all going to be lost. You folks are all going to be lost. No, he didn't do that at all, did he? But by building the ark and undoubtedly getting the interest of all the people who saw it, Noah, what are you doing? I'm building an ark. Why? There's going to be a worldwide flood. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Yes, it is. But God said it's going to happen, and therefore it's going to happen. And he preached for 100 years to people, and how many people believed him? Nobody. Did it happen? Yes. And so our faith is no different. But it's interesting that in Genesis 6 and verse 8, it says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah believed in God, and Noah did what God asked him to the best of his ability long before the ark issue came up. But it also says in Genesis 6 and verse 22 that when God gave him the orders, it says, thus Noah did, according to most of the things God commanded him, so he did. Oh, all the things that God commanded him. You know, a preacher one time got up and preached on Noah and the ark, and he said, you know, if Noah had not followed the exact instructions of the ark and building it according to God's specifications, when the flood came, that ark would have sunk. And an older lady came up after the sermon and said, brother, I disagree with you on that. You do? Well, what do you think? She said, I don't think it ever would have started floating in the first place. Interesting thought. But what's that tell you? That Noah had an obedient faith. Yes, he was saved by grace, because grace is what made God tell Noah, I'm going to destroy the world by flood. Grace is what gave God the incentive to give Noah the instructions on an ark and how to build it. Grace is what made Noah save all the animals that he saved in the ark. And so Noah was saved by grace, but it was an obedient faith, and so he was saved by grace through faith. Noah did everything God commanded him. And so conclusion number one is, even though we're asked to do things that sometimes go beyond human reasoning, we're supposed to do it anyway because God said so. And then we can be saved by grace through faith. Another point of true obedient faith is it goes beyond what men sometimes think is wrong or right. And again, the example is Genesis 22, when God commanded Abraham to take his son, his only son Isaac, and offer him as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. Now, you know what I know. The Bible condemns soundly over and over again the idolatrous practice of taking your child and to the god of Moloch, passing him through the fire. How horrible is that? And I mean, how uncivilized is that? And so they're burning their children up in order to appease their God. Who ever heard of such an absurd thing? I mean, we don't appease the God of convenience in our country when we abort our babies, do we? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. No, sometimes we're not far from doing the same thing that we consider horrible back years ago. But how can a God who condemns destroying babies and passing them through the fire tell Abraham, you take your son, your only son Isaac, and you offer him on Mount Moriah? How does that work? Did Abraham not say, well, God, hang on a minute, I thought you didn't like that kind of thing? If he said it, we don't know about it. And furthermore, Abraham did think about it, didn't he? He didn't just blindly get up and say, okay, I'm the robot. He said it, I'm going to do it. But he did obey, didn't he? And so that's what we're supposed to do. He was willing to go against what he knew was right in order to obey the heavenly voice. And that's a hard thing to do if you stop and think about it. And my thought was, when I first read that, I thought, well, Moses, wait a minute, who is this? Abraham. Better be sure that God's the one doing the talking. Because I know a lot of people today say, well, God told me to do something. And they go out and kill somebody and say God told them to do it. Well, that's not true. God doesn't do that. But he did to Abraham. And Abraham loved his son Isaac. The word love is used first in this text, in the Bible. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. Abraham didn't just love his son, he loved him dearly. And so now you really see that the sacrifice isn't Isaac, is it? Who's making the sacrifice? Abraham. God is saying, Abraham, do you love me more than you love your son? And I don't have to make an application of that, do I? How many people give up their faith in God because they love their family more? Don't ask me to do something unreasonable. Well, God did. Jesus Christ said, if you love husband or wife, son or daughter, father or mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. And he meant it. Somebody says, well, I don't like that. Well, tell him that on the judgment day. We don't get a chance to make the rules. We can only tell you what God said. Well, I don't understand that. Well, maybe I don't either, but that's what it says, although it makes sense to me. If God made me and I'm here because of him, then I should put him first, shouldn't I? You know, I always tell children, obey your parents, because if it weren't for them, you wouldn't be here. Does that make sense? And so, children, obey your parents, and Abraham, obey your parents, your Father in heaven, when he tells you to do something that seems absurd and wrong. But Abraham got up the very next morning, and he took his son, and he went to Moriah with a servant and the pack animals, and they come to the base of Mount Moriah, and he tells his servants, you stay here, and the son and I will go up and offer a sacrifice to God. And on the way up, Isaac said, well, here's the fire and the wood, where's the sacrifice? What do you think Isaac would have done if Abraham said, well, son, you're it? He might have took off running the other way, because the implication is that Isaac is not a little baby. He's probably a teenager at this point, because he helped carry some of the lumber up the hill. But however, they got to the top, and Abraham takes his son. Imagine being that father, and you're taking your son, and you're building this fire. You have an altar, you have wood, and the last thing you put on top of it is your son. And tie him down, and you take that long dagger, and you raise your hand. What was that father thinking? My God, why have you done this to me? What have I done to ask this kind of sacrifice? And just as he's ready to plunge that dagger in his son's heart, God says, Abraham, Abraham, do not harm the lad or do anything to him, for now, what? I know that you love me. Whew. And you know what Abraham had told Isaac when he asked, where's the sacrifice? He said, the Lord will provide. You see, if you do the right thing, no matter whether you understand why or not, God always takes care of you. He may not take care of you the way you want him to, but he'll take care of you. Even if you have to be faithful unto death. Remember in Revelation chapter 6, there's the scene that John sees, and he said, I saw on this altar the souls of those who had been beheaded for the name of Christ. Did God let them down? And they cry out to the Lord, Lord, how long, holy and true, until you avenge our blood on the earth? And God says, I will do it, but you just wait a while. It's not time yet. You know, we sing in his time. Well, it wasn't time yet to avenge their blood, because he said there's more saints who are going to die just like you did. God had a purpose that was greater than the lives being sacrificed. If you read the rest of the book of Revelation, you understand what that purpose was. The purpose is that convicted people who love God with all their heart will die for the cause of Christ, because that cause is bigger than they are, and eternity is longer than their time, and the next life is more important than this one. That's what that's all about. And he's telling Satan, you can kill my people if you want to, but that's not going to end Christianity. In fact, the blood of martyrs spreads Christianity faster than anything else. And it all goes back to the story here. The true sacrifice was Abraham. Abraham sacrificed the thing you love the most. And the Bible says that once he did that, God called him the friend of God. And it's interesting to look at the New Testament commentary on this. Look at James chapter 2 for a moment, or listen to me as I read it. In verse 21 of James 2, it says, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? Do you know what the word faith really means? Trust in God. Trust in God when it's easy, and trust in God when it's hard. Trust in God when you understand what he's doing, and trust in God when you don't. Trust in God when you think you know better, but trust in God because in reality you don't. So he said, and the scripture was fulfilled which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see, when it says Abraham believed God, it doesn't mean he just sat there and said, well, that's a great plan. He carried it out right up to the very last moment when God stayed his hand. So Abraham was saved by God's grace. That's how he became the father of the faithful in the first place, but he was also saved by a very challenging and trying obedience. Now, what's interesting is Hebrews 11 tells us the thinking process of Abraham. Genesis doesn't say a thing about it. But as a father, I just cringe at thinking about killing my own son. I don't know if I could do that or not if God required it of me. How horrible it would be. And Abraham must have, as a father, gone through all the agony that anyone would in this situation. But Hebrews 11 tells us something about that. It says in verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed should be called. So not only does Abraham have the challenge of sacrificing his beloved son for reasons he doesn't understand, but also realizing that, well, now God said, this is the one. I've already had one son, and God said the promise isn't coming through Ishmael. The promise is coming through Isaac. And now God said, kill Isaac. How's God going to keep his promise? Because this son is not married. He doesn't have children. He can't have a son if he's dead. Well, I don't know, because there's the conflict, and God didn't tell me about that. All I know is he told me what to do, and I'm just going to do it and let God worry about it. But notice what it says in Hebrews 11. It says, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. That's the opinion that Abraham held that kept him going. I'm going to do what God says, and I know God will raise him up because God's not a liar, and somehow or another he's going to have to resurrect him in order for Isaac to have a son. That's logical, isn't it? But you see what that's all based on? Trust in God. Not human reasoning, not human think so, not human opinion. It's trusting in God. And it goes on to say that his trust was not unfounded. How did Abraham know that God was going to raise Isaac from the dead if he killed him? Well, it says, from which also he had already received him in a figurative sense. You do remember Isaac was the son of Abraham and Sarah's old age when she was past the age of childbirth and he was too old to have a son. So God raised Isaac up from their death. And that's what it's saying here. And Isaac and Abraham thought, well, if God can do that, if he can give a 90-year-old woman a baby, I guess he can raise my son from the dead if I kill him, so I'm going to trust in God and just go with it. Amen. But that's what you and I have to learn as Christians today. We get through all kinds of challenges, and never more in my lifetime has Christianity and true faith been challenged than in the world we live in today. But if you trust in God and do what He tells you to regardless, things will always turn out and God will take care of you. And even those martyrs in Revelation 6, God avenged their blood and made the wrong of putting them to death right, and they obtained eternal life. They received white robes and a crown, and they reigned for 2,000 years as a testimony to us of what you and I can do if we'll put our heart in it. And true obedient faith goes beyond what men can see as connected. It's almost comical to read Numbers chapter 21. It is, because I'm not there. You know one thing I can't stand? It starts with an S and ends with an N-A-K-E-S. What? Snakes. I hate snakes. The other day, Lily texted me and she said, "Papa, there's a snake in the basement." And I thought, oh, this isn't the first time this has happened. Her mother did the same thing on a Monday morning in Texas. There's a snake in the house. Boy, that'll wake you out of a deep sleep faster than anything if you hate snakes. So I'm thinking there's probably this gigantic snake in the basement, and I'm going to have to go wrestle that sucker. And maybe he's already got my granddaughters pinned down. I walked down there, that snake was the size of a worm, smaller than my little finger. And I'm still scared of it. Like, I'm going to get that thing. So I took this little blade and stuck it on his poor little head and tried to kill him, and it couldn't kill him with the carpet, so I scooped him up and flushed him down the commode. Lily said, "Papa, snakes swim." I said, "Yeah, but he's not swimming back up here." And then I thought, well, unless he's like that squirrel that did one time, so I don't know. Haven't seen any snakes come up the toilet yet, but stay tuned. So after I got done, I went and checked, and that poor little snake was about that long. It's a little red ringneck snake. I've never heard of it before. I don't know where it came from, how it got there. But they're totally harmless. They grow about 18 inches long. And I shouldn't let that poor critter go outside. Except I thought, he'll just crawl right back in. He's looking for a worm spot. So, I don't know, maybe God will forgive me for killing that poor little snake. All of that to say I really, really hate snakes. So in Numbers chapter 21, a lesson to all of us is Israel begins to whine and complain like they were so good at doing. It says, they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. So you know how we get grumpy when we get discouraged. They're tired and hungry, and their feet are worn out. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no food, no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread." How many of you like leftovers? Wow, more than I thought. Well, Thanksgiving evening, you guys are going to be in hog heaven. How many of you like them this third time? Fourth? Fifth? Sixth? How about for 40 years? You know, I relate to them. I don't like third overs. I'll do it once or maybe twice on Thanksgiving, but boy, after the fourth day, it's like, can I have something else? That's all they were saying. We're tired of manna. Well, you don't tell God that. Verse 6, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people came down with a bad cold. What'd they do? They died. You know, put yourself in that. They died. They didn't get sick. They died. Now what are you going to do? Keep in mind, the human lives are not more important than God. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we've spoken against the Lord, against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live." Are you kidding me? That's the plan? Never heard of that before. You know, you go to the doctor and you hope you have antivenom available somewhere. They didn't have any of that. They didn't have doctors or hospitals, and what kind of fiery serpent this was, I don't know. But you know what? It worked. And so what does this teach us? Well, you got to believe in God when you don't even see a connection to it. What's the connection between a fiery serpent on a pole and looking at it and living? And the answer is God. Trust in me. You're tired, you're weary, I get that, but I've always given you food, I've always given you water, I've always given you manna. Maybe you need quail, and he gave them that later and killed a bunch of them because they liked it too much or something. But trust in me, I'll take care of you, is what God is saying. And so the fiery serpents came and killed a lot of them, and there's no logical connection between the brazen serpent and the cure, except God said that would work. And did it work? Yes. And is that the end of the story? Not if you're reading the Bible. Turn with me to John chapter 3. And we all know a very famous passage. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But do you know the verses that precede that? Verse 14, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. The same God that saved a snake-bitten Israelite in the wilderness just by looking at that pole and that fiery serpent is the same one that will save you if you will look to God and trust in his salvation through Jesus Christ our Lord. Isn't that interesting? It's all about trusting in him. And boy, we tell the truth by the way we act, don't we? And by the choices we make. And by the, oh yeah, I know the Bible says that, but. That's what some of the Israelites said. I know God said that, but. And they just got themselves killed for it. So if you want to have a faith that says, yeah, but, then go right ahead and butt yourself right into hell, because that's where you're headed. Those Israelites died in the wilderness. Don't think that they didn't. And if one was bitten and didn't look at the bronze serpent, guess what happened to him? He died too. It's all about trusting God and whether you believe what the Bible says or not. So you see, true obedient faith goes beyond human reasoning. True obedient faith goes beyond sometimes what man thinks is right or wrong. And true faith goes beyond what we can sometimes connect, cause and effect. And that's not the only time that's happened. You know, Naaman's leprosy in 2 Kings 5 didn't make any sense either, did it? Naaman was a great soldier for Syria, and they captured a young Israelite girl, and he was complaining about his leprosy, and the little girl told someone if he went and found the man in Israel who could cure leprosy, then he could be clear. And so I won't go to the whole story, but finally he comes to Elisha's house, and Elisha says, go dip 7 times in the river Jordan. And at first he objected, but when he finally submitted and did what he was told, and he dipped 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, this is not curing anything. 5, 6, I give up. You better not. The 7th time he came up, and he was as pure as a newborn baby's skin. That's perfect cureness. And that's because he did what God said, even though he couldn't see the connection. In John 9, verses 1 through 7, there's a blind man that Jesus spits on the ground and makes out of the dirt and the saliva a mixture and puts it on the man's eyes and says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. The word Siloam means sent. And I'm sure that blind man's thinking, well, now, why would you send a blind man on a mission? You know, I remember when I lived in Searcy, Arkansas, I walked in the post office one day, and they had a sign up on the front door. It said, no dogs allowed except seeing eye dogs. And I thought, well, the man can't read that if he's blind. And I'm pretty sure the dog can't read that. So who's that sign for? Everybody else who sees the dog in the post office. But you ever stop and think that God tells the blind man, go wash the pool? Did somebody lead him to the pool? Did he know his way around? I don't know. And why would you do that? And what connection is between the water of Siloam, which, by the way, is still in Israel today, and you can go wash your eyes and that all you want, it won't cure your blindness. And then this spittle that and mixture that he puts on there and puts on his eyes. No connection at all, except the same one with Naaman, the same one with the fiery serpents, trusting God. And so we have no logical connection between the Jordan River and dipping 7 times and the cure except God. We have no connection between what man can see when it comes to, that should be verse 7, not 71, between the clay, the saliva, and the washing, except Jesus. But all these people were saved by grace and obedience. God's always gracious. We just have to learn the obedience part. And so what do we learn from all of this? Well, we learn, number one, that salvation is conditional. We have to do our part, even if God does the rest of it and the most of it. Salvation is conditional. Man must do his part because God is testing us to say, do you believe me or not? God gave Jericho to Israel in Joshua chapter 6, but they still had to march around the city once a day for 6 days and 7 times on the 7th day and blow the trumpet and shout and have the walls fall down. Why? Couldn't God make them fall down without all that? Sure he could. But he said, I want you to do your part. God will save those who obey the Father's will today. Jesus said in Matthew 7, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. There's the application. Do you do the Father's will in everything he commands? And James 1:22 says, the doer of the word is blessed, not the hearer only. And so in verse 25, he said, we will be blessed in what we do. And so an obedient faith shows that salvation is conditional. Number 2, an obedient faith shows that we are relying and trusting on God. And baptism is humbly submitting to God's way, just like Naaman did when he went to the River Jordan and dipped 7 times. I don't see a connection between my sins being washed away and being baptized. You know what the connection is? God said do it. You heard about the little boy who went to a service and several people were baptized. And so after everybody left, he walked up to the baptistry and drained out the baptistry. Somebody said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm looking for the sins. I don't see them down here anywhere. And Peter explained that a long time ago. He said, we are saved by the antitype baptism, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God. You know what that means? I know I'm saved from my sins when I'm baptized because God said it and I believe in him. That's what it's all about. And I have a written guarantee that I can be saved because I said, God, I did what you told me to. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. We rise to walk a new life and we follow the instructions and we do what it says. And the judgment day, God said, did you do what I told you? Yes, sir, to the best of my ability. Well, when you fell short, did you pray and ask forgiveness through your son, Jesus? Yes, I did. Well done, good and faithful servant. But it's not about me. It's trusting in God. And that's a lifetime choice. How many will be lost because they did not trust in God? And the answer is all of them. Kind of sad. Because they could have done better. And obedient faith shows that God gets the glory. We need to realize that's part of it too. In Leviticus 10:1-3, when Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, you talk about connection. He's a relative of Moses, his brother. That's Nadab and Abihu are Moses' nephews. And they offer profane fire, which God had not commanded. And so God burned them up. Why? Because the fire was too hot? No, because they dishonored God, and they're supposed to be the priests. And so if we fail to give God the glory, trouble arises. Poor Moses himself learned in Numbers 20, verses 11 and 12, that when he failed to believe God and hallow him in the eyes of the children of Israel, God said, Moses, you're not going to lead these people into the promised land. What did he do wrong? God said, speak to the rock, and he struck it twice. Why? You failed to honor me before the people. You said, see now, you rebels, must we fetch water? Moses didn't fetch anything. God did, and even Moses in his anger forgot that. And even in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 18, the Bible says, the gospel is foolishness to those who do not believe. But to us who do believe, Christ, the power of God and the salvation of God. If you haven't learned the lesson, listen to what the Bible says at the end of 1 Corinthians 1. It says, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. You know, people mock and laugh at the stories we've read about this morning. Oh, there was no fiery serpents in the wilderness. There's no full worldwide flood. None of that really happened. The wise people of the world tell us how foolish we are to believe it. God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things that are mighty. There's nothing but humility and submission in being a Christian. And the world mocks that. But you and I trust in God. And the base things of the world, the things which are despised, God has chosen. If you need an example of that, you don't have to look any farther than Jesus, the Son of God, being born to Joseph and Mary, two poor people, in a little bitty country called Israel that had no political power whatsoever, that was subjugated by the Roman Empire, which is a big deal, and born in a little town of Bethlehem where nothing really ever happened there before. And if that weren't bad enough, raised in Nazareth, and even the Jews said nothing good comes out of that. Why do you think God did all of that? Because he was trying to teach the world that the things which the world despises, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence, but of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, that as it is written, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. Amen. Christianity is all about glorying in the Lord, and we need to keep that in mind. The lesson is yours to decide what to do with, because the real question now is, what kind of faith do you have? Do you have the kind the Bible requires? It asks a lot of us sometimes, doesn't it? Love God more than anything. Trust God more than anything. Love God even more than your own life. Love God more than your own family. And how many people failed the test? Moses didn't. Abraham didn't. Jesus didn't. Though he were a son, he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. He had to trust in God too. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, not my will, but thy will be done. If I've got to go to the cross, let's go. Because I'm not doing my will, I'm doing yours. Therefore the Father loves me, he said, because I always do those things that are pleasing to him. Do you always do what is pleasing to the Lord? If not, then you need the blood of Jesus Christ just like I do. Not only to be baptized in the watery grave of baptism, to have the blood of Christ wash my sins away, but to arise to walk in a new life where to the best of my ability I try to serve the Lord. You know, Moses wasn't perfect. Abraham wasn't perfect. Sarah wasn't perfect. None of the Bible characters that are heroes are perfect. But when Jesus Christ arose from the dead and ascended on high, he sat down at the right hand of God to be what? Our high priest, to whom we can come boldly when we need forgiveness and ask his blood to wash that sin away again. Christianity is a foolproof plan of salvation if you'll simply trust and obey. Won't you, while we stand and sing?